Hey, welcome to That Guy Talks Movies. I am that guy talking movies. And on this episode, I'm looking forward to talking about this classic 1993 Brian De Palma film starring Al Pacino, Sean Penn, Carlito's Way. Now, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. I've actually, I have files of notes where, I'm going to discuss a certain movie or whatever. And Carlito's Way was one that I kept saying, oh, I got to tape that episode. Oh, I got to tape that episode. And then, of course, I had some time off and I wasn't taping for a bit. Anyway, this crept back into my consciousness because Arrow Video just, I believe, last week announced that they're going to be releasing in September. It's available for pre-order now, but they're releasing the limited edition Carlito's Way 4K Blu-ray. So I'm excited about that, and I figured that would be, good to, a good time to talk about that, and of course talk about the movie. So that's what we're going to do next on That Guy Talks Movies. All right, so Carlito's Way. I've been looking forward to discussing this with you. It kind of also brings me back to what the original premise for my channel was, which was beyond just being a YouTube channel that, rattles off my opinion on some latest movie that came out and me, sitting down and do a quick review so I get it up in time and just telling you information whether I liked or didn't like a movie, which sometimes I find value in it. If you build that trust and you take my opinion for any, having any particular weight, then yeah, I guess it has some relevance. But more so for me, I look at film in the perspective of there are so many movies, such a history of film that a lot of you haven't seen. So I always looked at this channel as a means for exploring content with you and sharing what I find to be the most relevant movies, in my past, things that I love, things that made me feel a certain way, things that have significance from a cultural standpoint, artistic standpoint, for whatever reason. And I want to share it and say, hey, look, if you've never seen this movie, it's a brand new movie for you. And I always used to end my videos by saying that. Remember, if a movie came out and, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, if you've never seen it, and the first time you sit down and watch it, that's the first time you've seen it. It's a brand new movie for you. So going back to that particular premise for the show, we're going to get into a movie, Carlito's Way. Before we do it, let's just quickly get it out of the way. If somehow you found me through the algorithm and whatever, YouTube was being kind to me and I used the right hashtags, and you are here and you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that red subscribe button. I truly appreciate that. Is it red? Actually, it's not red. The graphic is red on my screen now, but you know what I mean. The little subscribe button down there, hit that. To those of you who actually stay with me, who are subscribed already, thank you for being here. Let's now get into Carlito's Way. So, 1993. This is based on a novel by Edwin Torres, and the screenplay is by David Cope. I'm just going to read, what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to read the introduction of what this movie's about, the plot, right? And then we'll get into it. 1975, New York, after having served 5 years of a 30-year prison sentence, career criminal Carlito Brigante is freed on a legal technicality exploited by his close friend and lawyer David Kleinfeld. Carlito vows to end his unlawful activities, but is persuaded to accompany his young cousin. Anyway, I'm not even going to get into that. Basically, the premise of this whole thing, Carlito Brigante, played by Al Pacino, is a criminal who's been locked away for 30 years, but he gets off on a technicality after 5 years. His seedy lawyer, seedy is being mild of a statement when it comes to his lawyer. We'll get into that in a minute. He winds up getting off on a technicality, and that's what opens the movie up. It's actually a really brilliant scene. It's Al Pacino in court, thanking the court and thanking the prosecution for doing an illegal wiretap or whatever it was that landed him in jail in the first place. And he's thanking them and giving this Oscar-worthy speech to the entire court. And the judge is just like totally had it with him, but he lets him speak. And it's actually really interesting. And Pacino plays the hell out of it very, very well. So when he's giving that speech and when he's talking about his life, he basically says he's reformed and he's changed his life. He's changed his ways. He's going to be reinvigorated, whatever. He goes through this whole speech and basically says that he's reformed and he's going to get out of the life of crime, and prison in the last 5 years has done him well. Now, when he's making that speech, you can't help but feel like, okay, this is like some criminal and who's talking all this shit, but he's probably going to go right back into doing what he's doing. So at first, especially with the way he delivers that particular speech, that's how you feel. You feel like, all right, this is a crock of shit, but he's playing it up. He's hamming it up for the moment. So let's get into the actual story. Turns out Carlito Brigante actually does want to get out of crime. He does want to leave that life behind. So what does he do? He goes right back to the barrio, right back to the hood where all the criminals are. Now that in itself is a mistake, and a sort of anybody with an understanding of, you kind of are the company that you keep. And the fact that he went and hung around the same exact people that he was hanging around before kind of is like some foreshadowing here. But anyway, he goes, he hangs out, and he finds himself being trapped in this world that he's really trying to get out of. So I think early on, what makes this interesting is that you can actually feel that he does genuinely want to get out. You get past that point where you think it was all sarcasm, it was all a show in the beginning, and you actually realize this guy really wants to leave. He has a plan. He wants to get enough money to open a rental car business in like the Bahamas somewhere. I think it's the Bahamas or Florida, but he just wants out, and he doesn't want anything to do with that particular life. Now, inevitably, he winds up getting pulled in. That line from Godfather 3 is more apropos here in this movie, right? Things just keep pulling it back in as much as he keeps wanting to get out. And again, being surrounded in the environment that he's in, sure enough, he has to navigate that line of, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just here trying to do X, Y, Z so I can get money and get out. I'm not going to do spoilers here. I'm just going to say that again, inevitably being surrounded by the people he was previously with, as much as he explains to everyone around him, look, I'm not doing that anymore, because he has plenty of people trying to pull him back in, which is natural, right? Again, he's surrounded by people who aren't reforming their lives. His attorney, Davy Kleinfeld, played brilliantly by Sean Penn in one of Sean Penn's greatest performances. I'd probably say it's Sean Penn's best performance, or at least it's my favorite. His lawyer is the most criminal, seedy guy in this, probably because of the fact that he's white collar, an attorney, and he's filthy. So typically, and this is my opinion, some of the biggest criminals are white collar criminals. They're not the guys from the streets. They're not the guys trying to feed their family, or some guy who's, part of organized crime and trying to, live the same hypocrisy that the government does, right, on a regular basis. Those of you who see The Godfather, that reference in that line and the comparison of the government and how they do business and how shady they are versus, the mob organizations, right? So here, Davy Kleinfeld, this lawyer, who's this guy who's supposed to be, has this life, is actually trying to be a gangster, trying to get into this life. Meanwhile, Carlo Brigante is trying to get out of that life. Yet again, he surrounds himself with people who are not good for his well-being and not good for his future. A lot of people will say that, it's obvious that it's a gangster film, and it has the elements of a gangster film, right? It's about a former criminal, former drug dealer. It takes place in, in the hood, in the city, and there are things that you see that are drug, but it's not a film like, it's not a Scorsese film where you're focused on the mob and the mob activity, right? It's not Scarface, where you're watching a gangster criminal drug dealer, rise to the heights of, the criminal underworld and all that stuff. We're going to get more on Scarface in a minute, but it's not that movie. It's literally a guy trying to get out and a guy trying to reform his life. And I want to talk about some of the comparisons to Scarface, because inevitably this film got compared to Scarface. I mean, here we go. It's Al Pacino once again affecting a Latino accent, this time Puerto Rican versus Cuban in Scarface. And is it flawless? Absolutely not. It's Al Pacino playing a Puerto Rican. It has its moments, but it doesn't distract from the film, doesn't take anything away from it. Besides Sean Penn, also, I want to talk about some of the other casts. So Penelope Ann Miller plays Gail, who was a former love interest of his. Luis Guzman, Pachanga, was like an old bodyguard of his, one of his running mates when he was in crime. And of course, the incredible John Leguizamo playing Benny Blanco from the Bronx. Another one of Leguizamo's great roles. He's a fantastic, no matter what he does, he's always fantastic. I particularly have a fondness of him when he did Spawn back in 90, I think that was 97, 96. He did Spawn. He played Clown. And I just thought that it showed a lot of range for him. But Benny Blanco in this is that character. He's the younger version, if you will, of what Carlito used to be. He is essentially what Carlito used to be, the big shot, the guy on the rise in this game. And he essentially becomes Carlito's, the biggest problem for Carlito. And the thing about it is Carlito doesn't recognize the fact that this guy who he's sort of rudely dismissing as a young nobody, like you're nobody, right? And there's several lines in the film, and again, I'm not giving a bunch of it away, but there's a lot of confrontation with Benny Blanco. Benny Blanco first admires him, is like, oh, you've got a reputation, I know who you are, you're Carlito Brigante, and he wants kind of to side with him a little bit. And Carlito, of course, wants nothing to do with him. And he, not only is it about Carlito trying to get out of the life, but it's Carlito also dismissing this young whatever, like, who do you think you are? Like, you don't even have the right to talk to me. And that ends up biting him in the ass a little bit. And he doesn't recognize that the game has changed. Things are different. There's some reference to that in the film about how, nowadays they blow you away with a shotgun. It's that whole thing of, back in the day, it used to be a street fight and people actually just fought. And now it's guns right away. You can't even get a bloody nose. You just get shot. So times have changed since he's been in jail, since he's been on top. And now you've got this younger generation, and he tries to effectively separate himself from it. And also, but also he's a little too arrogant in his dismissal of the younger generation and of Benny Blanco. And that just becomes a situation where it's his own fault, and he doesn't recognize that this kid is who he once was, as much as he tries to deny it. And it actually, there's a line in the film, there's a club owner named Ron, who literally tells Carlito, like, he's you when you were younger, like, he's you should respect this guy. And Pacino's character, Carlito basically says, never me, not me. Like, he's never going to be me. It's not going to happen. Again, ends up biting him in the ass at some point. But other performances, again, the performance by John Leguizamo, Sean Penn, unbelievable in this film. I'll say it again, Sean Penn, unbelievable in this film, as far as the look that he goes with and as far as his performance as a seedy scumbag, white-collar criminal. I don't think it gets better than this. Let me quickly talk about the obvious comparison with Scarface, all right? So this is, it's very much a Brian De Palma film, and it has certain elements, not so much of Scarface, but I feel more of like The Untouchables, Dressed to Kill, some of the suspense, some of the tracking that's there. You're going to feel, it's also a shootout, like in The Untouchables, there's a shootout in Chicago in that station and the escalators and such and the steps. And there's one of those in this film, but it takes place in New York in Grand Central Station. So very Brian De Palma. But I want to talk about the comparison with Scarface, with people saying, oh, it's just like Scarface. It's another gangster thing where Pacino playing this gangster. But again, you look at Carlito's Way, it's a guy trying to leave behind a bad life to go into a good life, whereas Scarface's character was a guy leaving behind a bad life but getting into another bad, like trying to get into a worse life, like trying to be even badder, if that makes any sense, right? Cuban refugee who had a history in Cuba and who goes ahead to America and becomes this drug lord and gets into crime and killing people, murder, and everything. Whereas he wants nothing to do with anything good. Whereas Carlito is exactly the opposite. He had a previous life and he's trying to go straight. So essentially you've got two people trying to make a future and forget about their past, but in totally different ways. Also, in relation to the whole Benny Blanco thing and different generations, Scarface, it's the young generation disrespecting the older generation. Look at Scarface and look at how he handled Frank, his mentor in that business who brought him into the game, and see ultimately what happens there. So you've got young, Tony Montana is the younger generation disrespecting the older generation and taking over. And there's a lot of reference there about that, generational thing and change in power and change in status in society and such. And in, Carlito's Way, right? He's the older generation being ousted by the younger generation. So it's exactly the opposite in the movies. One of the other things that I didn't really think about, it didn't touch on, is that I think the other reason for Carlito's outright disdain and sort of like just abhorrence for Benny Blanco, the moment he meets him, the moment he sees him and realizes, who he is and such, not that he ever acknowledges who he is in that way, like accepting it, but it does remind him, as much as on the outside he's trying to deny that this kid is like him or a newer version of him or a younger version of him, how he used to be. That's a reminder to him And that is very much what he's not looking for. So I think the outright outrage and the rude way he handles Benny Blanco is him lashing out because he recognizes that he does see him as him, and he doesn't want that reminder of his past life because, again, he's trying to get out of this current situation. He's trying to move on. And so I think I always struggled with why he was so rude to him. Why, like, he could have handled him a little different and a little more respectful, but it's deliberately, when you see the way he handles him, it is deliberately just obnoxious. And you look at it like, okay, is this just a setup for him to have a beef with some crime person? But no, it's psychologically, when you think about it, Carlito is lashing out because he knows that inside, in his mind, he recognizes this kid is him. He recognizes that whole thing. Again, it's Carlito versus Carlito. What's most important here overall, after all this I'm talking about, is the entire film as one unit, right? I think that the critics early on, back in '93, gave it a hard time. And again, the inevitable comparisons to Scarface and another gangster movie, that was there. But I think that they jumped the gun on that. And I think that this film has remained a cult favorite and a classic for the years that, and it happens to a lot of films. King of New York, same thing happened, right? Christopher Walken, which I did a review on this channel about that. So you can look for the link for that. But same thing. I think this is a superior film. I think the performance by Pacino, I think the performance by Penn, the performance by John Leguizamo keep it 100%. You're engaged in this. You're engaged in the characters. People are going to say that there are certain like Gail, for example, his girlfriend, the woman he's trying to get with it, the love interest in this movie, she wasn't fleshed out. She didn't need to be fleshed out. I don't think it was necessary to flesh her out. It wasn't her story. It was Carlito's story, and Carlito reaching for things that he's trying to hold on to while he's letting go of other things. And she was that one part. I think what's critical here is getting Carlito's perspective, and it's through Carlito's perspective that this movie's even told, right? So it's voiceover. And the movie starts from the ending. Again, I'm not going to reveal anything here in case you haven't seen it, but it starts from the ending and there's voiceover, and Carlito, you kind of go through the history and how we got to this moment in time. That starts off the movie. But you recognize you are on the ride with Carlito. You are in this moment and you kind of feel him trying to get out right up to, there are shots at the end, again, that are very reminiscent of Untouchables in certain scenes, but where he's running through a train station and you can feel the level of anxiety and he's about to escape. He's escaping. And you're with him for that ride. You want him to escape because you're not looking at it like, oh, it's a criminal who's still kind of a criminal, but he's claiming he wants to get out. He's trying to have this moral line and we don't quite believe him because he's full of shit. You actually really feel there are moments in this film where that line of tension, he's towing that line between his natural instincts as a criminal, which is pretty much what guides him, the desire to do what I know I need to do, but at the same point, I shouldn't do that because I know where it's going to lead, right? So he is trying to make conscious decisions, but he winds up finding that you can't quite toe that line. You're either in or you're out. And incidentally, the same thing happens with Davy Kleinfeld, with Sean Penn's character. You're either in or you're out. And Carlito gives him a few, poundings in the head, like he didn't physically hit him, but he's explaining to Kleinfeld that this is not something, being a gangster is not something you're half in, you're half out, you're sometimesy, sometimes not. And it's the same thing with Carlito. This is a guy who went back to the hood, wanting to get out of the hood, wanting to change his life. He goes back, hangs out with the same people, finds his natural instincts returning, finds himself surrounded by people who are going to fuel those instincts, and yet he tries to get out. But anyway, I think it's a fantastic film. If you've not seen Carlito's Way, you definitely need to see Carlito's Way. I think it's a masterpiece in overall work for De Palma, and I think if you're a Pacino fan, you definitely should own this. Now, that brings me to the 4K Arrow video announcement. I'm just going to go ahead and read some of this. I know this is coming out in September, I believe. And let's take a look at some of the limited edition. So, dual format, limited edition 4K. Limited edition packaging with reversible sleeve featuring original and newly commissioned artwork by Obviously Creative. Double-sided fold-out poster featuring newly commissioned artwork by Tom Ralston and Obviously Creative. 7 double-sided feature postcard size lobby card reproductions. I always like all these little package things that come in Arrow Video stuff. And you get an illustrated collector's book featuring new writing on the film by Barry Forshaw and original production notes. And there's also, so you get the 4K Ultra HD, 2160p presentation, high dynamic range, the color grading here. So I have the 4K edition. So I actually have this one. And this one over the Blu-ray, the HDR on this is what kind of makes it stand out in comparison to that Blu-ray. It's not a outstanding 4K disc. It's not something it's not reference quality. It's not Top Gun Maverick by any stretch, but it is from a color standpoint and that HDR, you will notice it. The audio, this is DTS-X, and you get those club scenes. There are some club scenes in here that are really good as far as the music goes and everything like that. So, if you own the Blu-ray, I would say upgrade to the 4K. And if you're into Arrow Video and some of these limited edition sets, you're definitely going to want this. The additional items that are coming on the Arrow that are not on this 4K as far as special features go would be, there's an audio commentary by Douglas Keesley. It's called Carlito and the Judge. A brand new interview with Judge Edwin Torres, author of Carlito's Way and After Hours. There is Curating Carlito's Way, a brand new interview with editors Bill Pankow and Christina Bowden. De Palma's Way, a brand new appreciation by film critic David Edelstein. And then there's another one called All the Snitches in the World, the locations of Carlito's Way, a brand new look at the New York locations of Carlito's Way and how they look today. The other items on this Arrow release are already ones that they're being ported over from the original 4K. So there's De Palma on Carlito's Way, an archival interview with director Brian De Palma talking about it. There's the making of Carlito's Way. It's an archival documentary on the making of the original, for the DVD release. There's the original promotional feature, image gallery, and some deleted scenes. That is slated for release September 26th, 2023, available for pre-order now on Arrow Video site. So that's it. I would highly recommend, again, if you've not seen Carlito's Way, immediately see Carlito's Way. I came across another YouTuber who I admire, who talks about film and collecting and home media and such. And he was doing a video on Brian De Palma films. Actually, he was doing a video on Tony Scott. And I think he did another one on some Arrow. He was doing the Arrow release, and he talked about this particular Arrow release, but he'd never seen it. God, I immediately commented. I was like, brother, you got to see Carlito's Way. This is an absolutely magnificent film. You're going to love it again if you're a Pacino fan. If you're a fan and a study of really fine performances, you're going to love Sean Penn's work in this film. And that's really it. That's all I want to say about it. If you liked the video, hit that like button. If you love Carlito's Way, let me know in the comments below. Let me know your take on this let me know if you're going to plan on getting this 4K limited edition from Arrow Video. I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. I truly appreciate that. And for those of you who stuck with me, I appreciate you watching this again. And I will see you on the next That Guy Talks Movies.